Talk to your stakeholder about what they want to see and why. We're building trust, we're building that relationship. It sounds obvious, but you'd be amazed how many people just present the data that they have. Don't just show the metric, don't just show the number, but tell the story around it. Be prepared to have a conversation about that and how your behavior will change as a result of it. Really good organizations are actually using the data. They are using it to guide and coach their teams.
Metrics. Is there any faster way to distract staff, frustrate executives, and waste time than measuring and communicating the wrong things? Leaning into data-driven decisions sounds great, but requires a thoughtful approach. Success means not just selecting metrics that matter, but being able to share and communicate them to tell a story that executives and the board actually care about. Joining me today to talk about how we can establish high-value dashboards and metrics is AVP of Research, Carleen McCubbin. Carleen, thanks for joining today.
Thanks, Jeff. Looking forward to it.
Amazing. So, let's get this out of the way. IT metrics 2025. I would hope a lot of people know why these are so important, but what's the state of the nation out there right now?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question because there is not a single organization, I would bet. I haven't surveyed every organization, but I bet there's almost no organizations out there that have no metrics, right? Or haven't been tracking metrics for years. But the fact is, the majority of organizations are really, really bad at it. And this isn't just me saying that. This is something that we've seen in our data. When we look at our management and governance diagnostic, of the 45 core processes that we've been tracking data for over the last 10 years, performance measurement is the second lowest effectiveness.
Wow.
Yeah, at 5.8 out of 10 overall, rated by IT professionals. On the flip side, when we ask CXOs how they feel about it, it's just as bleak. 70 to 80% of CXOs believe that there is significant improvement required when it comes to how IT is measuring not only technology performance, but particularly business value, investments, customer experience. And so despite the fact that at this point, everyone should be good at this, everyone continues to struggle. And that had me curious as to why that could be.
So we talk a little bit about, metrics and dashboards in this. Where is the pain? Is it selecting the right metrics? Is it finding a way to present them? Where are people hurting and what do we recommend?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of both, right? And an underlying cause of trust, right? So from a dashboard's perspective, we have this issue of making sure that we are showing information in a consumable way. Stop showing numbers to people that they don't understand or they don't know how to use it. Or worse yet, they don't care about. They have no idea why those metrics are important to them. They're meaningless, not connected to their strategy. And we continue to show this information, show this data because we have it, right? And so when we're demonstrating or providing this information in dashboards, people can't consume it and they don't care about it. This connects back to the metrics problem, right? Where we are tracking often, not all the time, but often we're tracking the wrong things. A lot of times that comes down to the fact that we have so much data in IT that we either overrepresent the data or we present too much information and we're not pulling back and really editing ourselves to what our audience cares about. Right? And the third underlying factor that I think is the most important part of this is people don't like the data. Right?
Oh, they don't like it.
So they don't like it. They don't trust the data. So if I'm presenting information and data to you and you just tell me, I don't care what this is, I don't believe you. I don't believe where this has come from. And you're still continuing to present the same data, the same information over and over again, you've completely lost your audience. You're completely losing trust in your ability to lead that part of the organization. And so these three icebergs, I would say, result in real issues and almost, risks to the organization.
So let's maybe step a little bit deeper into those, real risks and issues. So we talked already about trust, right? And trust is a biggie. What happens to your mission? What happens to your ability to execute if you don't have the right metrics?
Right. So there's a couple key things. So let's look at this on two sides, right? What you're presenting outward to your business executives, your organization, There's issues on that side. And then there's also issues within the IT department. The way you're measured often dictates what you should focus on, right? It indicates what's important to the organization and guides behavior, right? And this can become, to use your word, dangerous, right? Where we are incentivizing the wrong behaviors, we are motivating towards the wrong behaviors, we're focusing on hitting a metric, even if that metric doesn't make sense, right? My colleagues who we'll chat with later, Tony and Balance, refer to this as watermelon metrics, right? Where things appear green on the outside, but they're really red on the inside, right? And so they're changing behaviors in a way that could potentially lead the staff down the wrong path, prioritizing the wrong things. On the flip side, these metrics can be dangerous when you present them to your executives, because they may indicate that you don't know what they care about, right? You're measuring something that really isn't important to me at all. They can reinforce more of a support role within the organization if you're only reporting on things like uptime, or if you're only reporting on things like how many service desk tickets you've closed. What's that saying to your leader about who you are as an organization, right? And so it's really critical that we tie these metrics back to each audience that we're presenting them to. And we're really connecting them back to what they care about and understand why they care about it.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about, our advice here and our guidance. And I want to walk through some of the key insights. The first one is, I think in your words, Carleen, it's all about having metrics that drive behaviors. Can you, tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So this can sometimes come across as a little bit controversial, but I think if you think about it, it really makes sense. The reason why we have dashboards and metrics should be to drive behavior and decision-making. That data should guide where we're going, what we're doing, what we focus on, how we change the way we react and act, right? And so one of the first things we always want to look at is when you're building that information, when you're presenting that information, how does it change my behavior, right? How do I want my team's behavior to change as a result of that? How am I making decisions based on it? And am I able to make good decisions in light of the data that I have? And that's really important. A lot of people think of metrics as a way to indicate how we've been doing, and almost like a reactive view of performance, when it should guide future performance, right? And changes that you want to make.
So is it fair, in this world with this goal to, maybe look at your current set of metrics or your dashboard, asking the question, is this metric going to change behavior, or what behavior this is going to change? Is that a useful exercise?
Absolutely, right? And so we take it from what are we measuring to, if I get this to go green, does this actually make a difference? Does this change a drop in the bucket of us achieving our business strategy? Does it allow us to perform and meet our goals in a way that makes sense? If I were to get that metric to green, is anything really better? And controversially, possibly, what did it take to get there? And so we think about these almost the tension metrics. So if I make a change on one thing, what's the trickle-down impact on the other side, right? And is it worth that trade-off?
Metrics we think of as, supporting data-driven decision-making, but we recommend resisting the urge to start with data. What does that mean, and what approach do we actually recommend?
Yeah, because we can get so data blind in a lot of different ways, right? We have all of this information. We're like, oh, that's actually really interesting. I think that's interesting. And so I think I'll present that to other people. The truth is, a lot of times they don't necessarily think the same things are interesting that I do. I have a stats background, so I think all the numbers are interesting. My husband doesn't feel that way, right? So what we really want to do, rather than starting with the data that we have, is what's the story we're trying to tell?
When we talk about that, when we talk about our audience and what they care about, is this a guessing game, or is this meant to be interactive? How do we answer those questions?
Yes, definitely guess.
Oh, of course, yeah. I thought that was going to be it.
No, yeah, so we want to sit down with each of our core stakeholders to really make sure we have a sense. First, we want to understand what they care about, right? What is it that they're measured on? Can we align our metrics to what they care about, right? How would we demonstrate that what we're doing is supporting that? Once we feel like we have a good sense of that, then there's another level of validation, right? Where we start to collect some of that information. We start building out that dashboard, what it would look like. And then again, you want to validate that. Is this what you want to see? Do you care about this? Before you go through all the effort of automating some of this stuff and pulling the data, see if it resonates with that audience, right? And then third, once we start collecting the data and presenting it back, you want to ask that question of trust. Do you believe what I'm showing you?
With that in mind, Carlene, when we talk about audiences, one of the things that we try and steer away from is these, IT activity level metrics. Is there, what does that mean? And are there, signs in your world that, like, even by looking at a dashboard, that we're measuring the wrong things?
Yeah. So if we're looking at that dashboard and you're only looking at how the IT team is spending their time, we're so in the weeds, right? If we're only looking, I used the example earlier of how many tickets you've closed and how long it took them to do that, there's a core problem in that, right? Because it shouldn't matter how many tickets I close. What I really want to do is stop tickets from happening, for example, right? I want to stop business disruptions, right? So if I'm only reporting at that activity level view, then I'm not actually going to be able to get to the roll-up of what our CIO, what our CFO really cares about, right? And so just because we have that data doesn't mean we need that data in that context.
Right. I'm going to ask you maybe a dangerous question, Carlene, which is, you talk about, service desk metrics as potentially being, on the wrong track. Can you give me a flavor of, types of metrics that, if you see on a dashboard that's being presented upwards, you're thinking like, okay, these are metrics that the audience may care about versus like, no, you're way deep in the weeds.
Yeah, for sure. So, and again, it should vary based on your audience, right? So let's start with CEO, right? So if we're presenting to our CEO, we're often going to want to focus on core elements of our overall IT digital strategy and performance, right? How are we executing on the most critical initiatives to the organization, right? So that may be something that makes sense to be on there. Overall satisfaction with IT. That's a great measure to have on there. Understanding of what the priorities are and how we're fulfilling those. That's something you do want to share upwards. What you may not want to share upwards is every single project that you're working on and their status, right? Because that's getting into the weeds. You want to roll that up to the portfolio view, right? CFO, you always want to understand, do they want to know when you're presenting to them, do they want to know the nitty-gritty details of every transaction? Or are we again rolling that up? And so while there's no wrong metrics for those individuals, part of me always wonders if they're asking for that level of data, why do they want it, right? What is it they think is going to change as a result of that, right? And so that's why that conferencing and validating is so important.
Carlene, the last insight that we've got here, which did resonate with me, is that metrics have a cost, right? They're not free. What does that mean in practice, and how should people be thinking about that?
So when we think about the cost associated with metrics, there's costs on multiple different levels, right? There's the cost of not only tracking the data, of increasing the quality of that data, of collecting it and reporting it. Those are the obvious costs associated with metrics. Oftentimes, it'll take time before we can automate to actually pull that information and data to get the data to a point where it is trustworthy, right? And if you have low data quality, this could take a significant portion of time. So obviously there are associated costs with doing that. On the flip side, the danger with some metrics is there's a cost to actually executing them, right? Because they change the way that your teams behave.
What are the best organizations doing here? Like paint me a picture of what it looks like with an organization that actually has their act together with the right metrics and the right dashboards.
So the first thing is, and it's going to sound obvious, talk to your stakeholder about what they want to see and why.
No guessing.
No guessing, right? Because once we have that conversation, now we have a shared understanding of needs. We're building trust. We're building that relationship. It sounds obvious, but you'd be amazed how many people just present the data that they have. So that's the first one that people do. And the second thing is be really strict about editing what you're presenting, right? Make sure it makes sense and tell the story around it. Don't just show the metric, right? Don't just show the number, but talk about what that's really saying, what it's implying, and be prepared to have a conversation about that and how your behavior will change as a result of it. The last thing I think really good organizations are doing is they're actually using the data. They're using it in coaching.
Crazy idea.
Yeah, right? They're not just tracking it for the fun of it, like making beautiful wallpaper of these dashboards. They are using it to guide and coach their teams. Right? And this is where we take it from an activity of just doing something for conformance to actually doing something to drive performance. Right? And that's really what we want to get people to move toward.
Joining me today on our panel for IT metrics and dashboards, we have research fellow Valence Howden, we've got AVP of research Carleen McCubbin, and we've got practice lead Tony Denford. Thanks everyone for joining today.
Thanks for having us.
Amazing. Let's jump right into it. So, I've got my list here of questions. And as I look through all these questions, one of the things I can't help but notice is there's about 1,000 ways to get metrics wrong. Like there's so many things that could go wrong. There's so many risks. There's, me asking you, well, can't they be manipulated? Are we measuring the right things? In sum, is any of this a good enough reason to back away from metrics? Or like, what's our posture given the danger here?
I'm not sure I see it as a danger. I think it highlights the fact that people don't know why they're measuring anything. If I understand what I'm trying to accomplish, metrics are a way marker. Am I heading in the right direction? Am I starting to see the behaviors I'm expecting? Am I getting the results I thought I would get? So I can redirect the things I need to do. What happens in most places is we don't know what to measure. We pick a number, hit 80%. Well, I can hit 80% 100 different ways. It doesn't accomplish anything because 80% is meaningless.
Yeah, I would say very similarly is if you don't have any metrics, if you're not doing anything with metrics, you're probably like a rudderless ship. You're floating around, you're the victim of circumstance. Mm-hmm. So you need to have something. The major errors people tend to have is they tend to show the data they have as opposed to understand what they're trying to achieve and use it to drive behaviors, which is the key to this whole thing.
Right. So, as we answer this question, I'm realizing there's probably like a step zero we should talk through, which is like, what is and is not a metric? Does a metric have to be just, a dollar figure or a number? What is a metric, and how broad should we be thinking in terms of, this idea of measurement?
Well, a metric is something you can measure.
Yeah. Oh, of course.
anything you can measure. But it doesn't have to be dollars. It could be sentiment. It could be whether a behavior is happening or not. It could be really anything, just something that you want to measure. But again, the key here is really driving it towards driving behaviors. So you want things that indicate that the right behaviors or the behaviors you hope to get out of your team are actually taking place, and measure those things. If you can measure those, you can see you're moving in the right direction. And then the inverse of that is, did I actually get the result I was expecting? So if I think, I'm going to go on a diet and suddenly lose weight, but I'm not measuring anything, and I try again in a month, maybe I did, maybe I didn't, who knows? If I come up with some metrics that say, okay, well, I'm going to reduce calories and I'm going to increase my output, now I can start measuring whether those things are happening. Now, if I say I'm going to increase my output, how am I measuring that I'm increasing my output? So I'm going to have to make some assumptions. And the assumption would be, if I go to the gym more often, or if I go for a run more often, I'm going to increase my output. So you measure for a period of time, you see what the result is, and if it's moving in the right direction, keep going. If it's not moving in the right direction fast enough, you need to do more. If it's moving too fast in the right direction, you need to do less. It's pretty straightforward.
Well, and to add to that, you want to think about, are they moving in the right direction, or are you just missing something, right? So like maybe you're increasing your output, maybe you're eating better, but it could be something outside of that that's actually inhibiting you from being able to get that outcome that you're looking for. And I think in some ways the metrics are the easy part. It's the understanding that's hard.
Yeah, it's the intent.
Right.
We said, do we use it effectively? Do we have the right ones? How many people that anyone talks to says, okay, what are the top 10? What are the things I should measure? The top 10 doesn't mean top 10 for you. Yeah. It just means this is the thing people commonly measure. But if the average person doesn't know what to measure, the top 10 of what they don't understand isn't useful to you. So step it back and go, why do I need to understand? What do I need to know to hit my objectives, adjust behaviors, understand the environment I'm working in? Let's measure the things that may help us understand and make better decisions, understand behavioral implications.
We talk about intent, we talk about value, but there's this underlying assumption that everyone's being a good corporate citizen here, right? And we all want the best things. One of the things that concerns me, and surely nobody has seen this before in real life, is people that are deliberately manipulating metrics or gaming them because once you have the politics of I'm sharing this with my boss and my boss's boss, there's the story you want to tell versus the reality, right? And there's probably, I have to imagine, there's like, I don't want you looking over here, look over here, shiny ball, shiny
Misdirection,
ball.
all magic.
Misdirection. So how, when we actually work with organizations that are confronted with these kind of realities, what's our guidance and how does that, fit into the mix?
Well, it steps back to what we've been talking about, which is intent and understanding what you're trying to accomplish and making sure the metrics help identify those things. It's easy to game a metric when the goal is to hit the number. It's hard to game a metric when its intent is to see if you're doing the right things, if I'm getting the right results, if my behaviors are changing in a meaningful way. It's harder to game that type of thing, which is intentionality in what I've designed and why I'm measuring. If I abstract that a little bit and just get back to, I need to increase sales by 10%, and all I want to do is increase sales by 10%, I can do that. I can be the most unethical person on the planet to get there, and we may not be able to retain that. But if the simple goal is to get there, I can find a million ways to get there. Whether I break the law to do it or not is irrelevant to the target if that's all I'm aiming for. Now, if I start to go back and say, well, we want to engage more people, we want to build a better brand view, we want people to understand us better, and these things will help, the perception of us, and I can measure things along those lines. But if you're solely focused on an individual number, I can surrogate that 100 ways.
But it's interesting because you hear, okay, I'm just curious, are there any times when gamifying metrics is a good idea?
I do it at a process level sometimes just to see behaviors. But again, the intent is not to have the metric. It's to achieve something through the gamification and having the right metrics in place to understand what's going on. We do that sometimes when we gamify process improvement. I'm going to measure how you performed when we run through it in the initial phase. Then I'm going to remeasure it once we've reset and recalibrated. Oh, this is what the role is supposed to do. Here's how you approach it. Now let's go at it again. I can see the difference through the gamification by looking at those particular metrics. So there's a lot of ways to use it for that purpose.
Well, because it can also help sometimes with motivation. So I'm going back to Tony's example of health, right? So I think we could all relate to, those things. It's early in the year right now when we're filming. And there's always step counter challenges. There's different health challenges that you participate in to drive motivation towards a specific positive outcome, right? And so I guess where's the line between when that's a good thing and when it's a dangerous thing to do, right?
Yeah, people are going to surrogate whether you like it or not, right? They're going to find ways to hit the target. Mm-hmm. I think the way you combat that is you have a balance of different things that you're going to have to measure. And it's not on one particular factor that you can win or lose, or you get bonus or you don't get bonus. So the great example is the mean time to resolve on incident tickets. So if you tell everyone the only goal here is to get our mean time to resolve on incident tickets down, then people start doing things like splitting incidents into multiple incidents or just closing them and not actually giving a solution, right? The goal shouldn't be to have lots of incident tickets and close them quickly. The goal should be to not have any incident tickets. Now, incident tickets are going to happen whether you plan to have any or not. So what you need to have is a balance to say, we are focused on stability. We want this system to be up and running and performing and doing everything we want it to do all the time. So that's the thing that we're focused on. And part of that stability conversation is when it goes down, can we bring it back up quickly, right? So we do need to measure that on a team basis, but when you're putting those stories up to the senior levels of your organization, you want to think about really highlighting the efforts and the activities you put into increasing stability.
Yeah, and I might even add, because that's a great example to sort of build off of, how many organizations, I need to be available, so we're going to measure uptime. I can hit uptime a million different ways. I can have one big outage that hits my, breaches it. I can have a bunch of micro hits that aggregate into that. So there are other metrics you tag on with uptime, like resilience, reliability. When you have mean time to resolve, you also have mean time between service incident, mean time to restore service, that look at all the different dimensions, because it might be easier for me as an organization to take a single hit. But if I run a bunch of, and we used to have long running transactions, if I have micro hits, those things never finish. My availability and uptime is going to be green, but everything falls apart on it. I'm not measuring, there are 10 different metrics for availability. Uptime is one, and it's the only one that typically gets measured. But if you're building a resilient organization, you have to measure all the other dynamics of availability and to make sure you're stable.
We haven't talked about it yet, but I think, there's probably organizations out there that view like stable metrics as a benefit, right? Like as the goal, we want to be measuring this year and the same thing next year and the same thing the year after that. To what degree, if I understand you correctly, it sounds like metrics should in some ways be reactive to, pain points or challenges.
The ones you're using
being
to make
dynamic
decisions,
is not a bad thing.
Yeah, the ones you're using to make decisions for sure need to be dynamic. There are some core ones that you probably want to measure year over year. If you've got sales numbers, you probably want to measure that your sales are increasing, right? So there are some core things that you probably do want to measure. But reporting on incident rates because 6 years ago it was really bad. You really? Have you not moved on from that?
Yeah.
There's an eternal view of metrics, which is once I measure it, I will always measure it.
Yeah.
The idea is I measure it when it has use. And if the use case is gone, the need to measure this is gone. So people have to have to think of it as a more fluid activity. I measure and manage these things based on the objectives. Again, it comes back to intent. If I know why I'm measuring, I also know why I don't need to, or when I need to stop, when it no longer serves me to do so. So again, it comes back to that foundation. I need to know why I'm doing this, because if my why changes, it comes back to whether or not I need to measure this at all.
In your worlds, what are some better example of perennial metrics or, metrics that we probably do want to be measuring year in and year out, if there are any? And what are metrics that you've seen that like we definitely want to have an end date on, when we're measuring?
If I was starting on the value side, the ones that tend to be a bit more flexible, there are certain ones. I do want to understand the financial metrics of my organization. I want to know how we're performing. I would also argue that anything that validates that where I spend my resources is accomplishing things. I want to measure that actively. Are we getting the best value out of our spend? Yes, I want to know that because it directs how I change other things. Is it because I don't assess it properly? We change how we assess to get a better number there. Is it because when we do the work, we don't do it well? Good, we change how we execute. Is it that conditions in the world have changed and we couldn't get there? Good, then we did it as much as we could. It redirects how you look at what work you do. So I always want to have a good understanding of those types of things to run and organize and govern an organization. So there are core things I would want to understand about how I work and how I behave. Other things are flexible. Cyber is a great example of metrics that have been flexing all the time. We check cyber training and how effective it is by looking at, well, we ran phishing tests and now we're going to run them again, 2 months after and see if people recognize these things. But if phishing stops being the core means of attack, or they just bypass that means entirely with AI, measuring that has very little value anymore. So we talk about multi-factor, we track how effective that is. People are working on means to bypass that have already started. So if MFA is no longer viable as a security measure, measuring its effectiveness no longer means anything to me. So in a dynamic place where things are shifting a lot, those metrics are always going to be fluid. And Tony mentioned one thing. Am I measuring how many incidents I handled, or am I measuring the reduction in implications because I do it better? Am I measuring the idea that I want fewer of them? But it affects other metrics that are related to it. First contact resolution. If I'm better at eliminating things I know, first contact resolution's time is going to spike because all we're left with the things we don't know how to deal with, that time is going to go up. Most people link them and have them both going down. It doesn't operate in the real world that way. So even understanding the dynamics of change from one metric to other related ones matters.
Interestingly, this blueprint has 6 different areas that we should have some kind of metrics for. Now, those metrics may change individually, but we always need to be doing financial. We always need to be doing looking at risk. We need some kind of reporting around our risks. We need to look at our staff and how they're doing and what our employee engagement is. So there's a bunch of areas there that we recommend that you should be doing some reporting on. Now, what you report on is less important than the fact that you're reporting on something. You should be looking at, like, if your employee engagement is low, right? Maybe there's a reason for that. Maybe there was just a pandemic and everybody's gone to work from home and now suddenly the world has changed, right? Okay, so we understand that. We need to measure things around that. But now we're out of the pandemic. Is there a reason that we're still low, or is there a reason that we've gone up, or what's going on? So
So if you have those core themes of what's important to you, what you value, the things that you value as an organization should be relatively stable, right? We shouldn't completely change our belief system over time as an organization necessarily. But what it takes to get there, to execute that can change in real time or be dynamic, right? And that's the things around it that you want to make sure that you're actually thinking about. What does it take to get there when it comes to the employee experience? What are the risks that we need to be conscious of? What is, what are the relationships?
Deliver on the projects, right? You've always got to do that.
So if we have these grounding principles, how you get there and what you measure to demonstrate that may vary.
Yeah. But you also want to understand the dynamic between them, even though, we have to measure in these 6 domains as an example. But if I start to see employee engagement going off a cliff, I may want to start measuring internal security metrics differently. If I've got dissatisfied staff with access to information, it actually represents a higher risk. And I start to measure other things to see if we're seeing changes in those domains as well. So one trigger might lead to another set of things to measure, or it might eliminate things to measure. So the idea is they're not unrelated measurements. Each one has a cascading effect on others in a complex system, and all organizations with people are a complex system. So understand what the implications are and whether it requires other action, other measurements to understand the situation better, so we understand what we're really dealing with. So that linkage is important, and it gets missed a lot too.
Well, and if I understand that linkage correctly, I mean, I don't think we've used this phrase yet, but it sounds like there's a pretty clear linkage in some ways to IT strategy, right? That we need to be thinking about what our initiatives are, like what are the big risks, what are the big priorities or projects, and tying metrics back to that. So is this, I mean, I'm trying to ask this question in not a silly way, but metrics obviously don't exist in a vacuum, right? So what other considerations do we need to be thinking about as we're coming up with these metrics?
You kind of know where I'm going to go with this one.
I think so.
The metrics feed your governance. How I decide on what I do with my strategy, how I decide to redirect my strategy based on information, how I look at the risks to my organizational purpose and mission will inform how I make adjustments at a governing level. Strategy is driven by governance and adjusted by governance. So if I have to make changes, the people who have governing authority have to make those decisions. So they have to be informed with the right set of data, the right metrics, the right information to make an informed decision. Some people do gut instinct, some people do it with, and you do it with the data you have available, the metrics you have to work with. But often we misplace where that's coming. Assurance isn't the strategy thing, it's a governance thing. Are we getting the right results? Are we doing the right things? Are we in compliance with? It goes to how I govern my organization, how we are accountable, how accountability lies. So if you put it in the right place, those people can act better. And it cascades through everything else the organization does, because it cascades into leadership behavior, it cascades into organizational context, and that affects culture. So if I change the environment through this information and the data I get, the culture shifts with it. If you don't create an environment to shift your culture based on the metrics, your culture doesn't shift, because culture is an emergent trait of an organization anyway.
I have this theory, and Balance, you've heard me talk about this before, and I like to, within the walls of Infotech, I call it Stragile, where I believe that if you have really good guiding principles, value, and you have a good sense of how you would measure that, then all of your strategy and other elements can be fully dynamic, right? But if you have these grounding principles of what success looks like, how you're going to track that, then you can take multiple different paths to get there. Yeah. And so, yes, you still need a strategy. Don't worry, I'm not saying we don't need a strategy, but like, what if we let the metrics and the values be our guide, and then we really craft everything around that? That allows you to be able to adapt more quickly to changes. It allows you to change your strategy. If something's not working, you put it down. You can think of another way of doing it, right? Rather than being so committed to the plan, right? And so I actually think that metrics and really clear values might be the one strategic differentiator for an organization who succeeds in truly being dynamic and adaptable.
So think of ChatGPT, and they've obviously got a strategy. They're obviously rolling through it, and they're obviously doing quite well out of it. Suddenly, the Chinese come in with a different product that completely disrupts their strategy. You think their 5-year strategy is still valid?
One of the things we haven't talked about related to this is that there are levels of metrics, right? And there's almost a chicken and egg situation between those metrics and your strategy and your governance, right? Where we have strategic metrics and goals that are going to guide our strategy. But then we have our operational metrics that determine whether we're hitting our strategy. And then we have more tactical level, right? And so these things are always connected and in flux together.
In my experience, one of the things I've seen go wrong is, to me, it's very human to just over-rotate on these easily quantifiable metrics, right? These hard numbers, which often tend to live at that tactical level, right? And as you go up to the strategic level, they get a little bit more nebulous, they get harder to measure, harder to collect, harder to even think about. And so rather than put in the work, we just have organizations that just take those tactical hard metrics and send them right up the flagpole. Is this something you're seeing? And I guess, if you agree with this assessment, should organizations be getting more comfortable with the idea that not every metric you present has to be super, the answer is 504?
I have a strong opinion on this one. I often talk about this concept of fuzzy metrics, right? So they're not necessarily things that I am measuring or do measure or even have the data for, but I know there's a problem. Right. So a good example is again, we'll go back to the service desk metrics. We're nailing it, right? We're getting everything done on time, and the experience from the end user is, we're not getting what we need, right? So if you know there's a problem, that's good enough. That's a piece of data for you. You know there's a problem. You just don't know how to measure it yet. So one of your first goals is we need to figure out what to measure, right? Let's actually think about what indicators we can look at in the way we work that could be used as data to actually quantify that. And so that's the first step you kind of go on. So you start off with really fuzzy metrics. I think there's a problem over here, right? Okay, so now I'm going to start measuring some things to confirm or deny if there's really a problem over here. I'm already taking action on it, by the way, right? I'm already starting to go, okay, I'm trying some things. And then you start collecting better data, and then you get really concise data that you're picking out of a system somewhere that's actually giving you the real story, right? So it's a bit of a journey. And what happens is people say, unless I have the perfect data that is defensible and I can, nobody's going to be able to question it, until I have that, I'm not going to move. You're much better moving with fuzzy data, explaining it's fuzzy, explaining what you're doing to make it less fuzzy, and, progressing towards that. To me, that's the key thing that a lot of organizations get wrong. They wait for perfect data.
To me, what I've heard is an implication that metrics are really effective when we're trying to change a behavior or when we're seeking to, understand, but less effective if we're impacting people's comp, if we're using them punitively. Would you go so far as to say metrics should not be used punitively? Metrics should not be used for comp and for performance?
Definitely not punitively. Comp is, you want to drive behavior, right? So comp is a really effective way to doing that. So, sometimes it's valuable to do that. It's, you really do want to look at what is the whole picture though, right? So if we agree that what I think is a priority is the priority, then we can move towards fixing it, right? And it's a very adult way to do things, right? It's much better to do it that way.
And sometimes you see people moving for that reason away from individual goals to team-based goals and metrics, right? And so we as a team succeed or fail together. And that's really you see it all the time in agile teams, right? Moving towards that so that you drive the right behaviors, but also more of a sense of camaraderie across the team around.
Yeah.
Right. And then they can self-organize around that.
Although I will add the caveat that agile teams actually need good information and good metrics to do it. A lot of times they're asked to make self-determined decisions. What they don't have is enough context to do that well. So when you see it done well, they have all the information, they understand the risk, those metrics are fed, that information is fed to them. I can make good informed decision actively. If I don't have all that information, I'm going to make a whole bunch of iterative decisions. They're just going to be horrible. I don't understand the implications. I don't have the data to support it. I don't have metrics that tell me anything. I don't have information that tells me enough to make a good decision on the ground at any point in time. So a lot of cases, we talk about self-organizing teams are either dramatically better or horribly worse. That's a factor of how it integrates the organization and a factor of the metrics and measurements and details and data they have. and the support they have, which is a whole separate thing from the metrics.
In a world where, we've got an imperfect alignment between metrics and objectives, we may have, metrics that are in tension with each other. We may have metrics that individually aren't perfectly aligned with objectives. We may have metrics that are gameable. What role is there for, I guess, subjectivity or for, human kind of insight or intervention to contextualize this stuff for decision-making and for evaluation?
I go back to that transparency comment before, right? Is I can make a statement and I can tell you some numbers that sound credible. 30,000 people were injured by paper clips in the last 6 months, right? And you go, oh, wow, that's really bad. We should ban paper clips, right?
The paper clip epidemic, yes.
Yeah.
But, I can make it sound credible, but there should be some verification. So do I have data to prove that, right? Is it just anecdotal that, I heard it from somebody else, so therefore I'm just repeating something that has gone through some kind of bubble where it's been amplified, right? We got to be clear as to this is why I think this. This is why this data is correct. Here's my source of data. And if it's fuzzy, be clear it's fuzzy. Right?
And if I can add to that, that's where the metric isn't the endpoint, right? It's part of the story. It's part of the conversation. So these metrics and this data, it starts the conversation. We have to be open to how people are interpreting that, talking about what could make it get there? Why did this happen? What could we do differently? And so if we stop treating data and the metric as the end and start thinking of it as the beginning of the conversation.
What decision is it going to help you make?
Yes. Right? Or how do I understand this better? How can this change my perspective or what I need to do? That's really a point where we can actually use it to drive change, right?
The other thing is you want to understand, based on the type of thing you're measuring, how you present that information. If I want to show you how things have changed, I'm going to use a style that shows change over time. I can show you that it's improved. If I can isolate the factors, I can show you, oh, this has gone down or this has gone up. If I need to show you how things are broken down, I can show you composition. I'm going to use those pie charts. I'm going to use those things that show this is what the composition of it looks like, so I can make decisions on that. So scatter graphs, all types of things that visually represent the type of thing you're showing. So if you understand the style of metric and what it's trying to show, you can also tailor the dashboard and the graphics to give that information, make it visual and make it compelling in a way that, well, a lot of people just throw up the numbers. Well, what do the numbers say? What's the message or the story that this is conveying in terms of what we're trying to achieve? And sometimes it is, yes, we have great incident handling, but what we're seeing is a common decline in how many things we have to handle. What you're seeing is an improvement in available time to do work because of things we've done. Now we can have those conversations because the story is being told of what's happening, how those changes we made have made a difference, and what that means for you. So if I can actually use the graphics to visualize that for people, the dashboard becomes more useful to them as well. In a lot of cases, dashboards are just dials or numbers, and dials and numbers aren't great ways to represent what's going on.
But it's interesting. So we started this conversation today talking about, why are we even talking about metrics? Doesn't everybody have metrics? And I think the problem is that we just think about dashboards and metrics as just the numbers, as just the dials. There's so much more around it. And I think that's fundamentally the challenge with the way people are addressing this, the way people are planning, the way they're using these numbers, and why you need to think about it differently.
What are the worst metrics you've come across in your, advisory careers or beyond?
Apart from my body weight. Sorry.
One of my pet peeve ones is when people track availability without skills. So we're tracking how we have 45 people available, but we don't have anybody with the right skills. That's my least favorite metric. If we're just going to pick things that we have pet peeves about, a lot of times people think, well, we should have enough people to do this. You have 400 people in IT. Well, nobody understands those systems. You built this thing in a completely different way than anybody has the ability to maintain. And so I think that leads to a lot of problems in conversations and feelings of like no value in what we're getting, that IT is over-resourced. So that's a personal pet peeve that I have. Availability is not a skill set, Jeff.
And I actually agree with that one because I think it drives some horrible decisions. If I don't understand capability and skills, I just look at volume of people. It's great that you have 100 people, but I need a quantum physics, someone skilled in quantum physics. We have none of them. It doesn't matter if I have 100 people, if none of them have the ability to do it. Now you think I'm over-resourced, you think I can do work that we just cannot do. And then I point the finger and say, you're not meeting our needs. Well, we don't have the skill set and you won't let us hire. You're kind of screwing your own needs up. Sorry, I'll rephrase that. You're kind of messing yourself up in terms of what you require. So a lot of people like to point fingers, but not understand what the data is telling them. Like I said, I'm not going to dig too deep into certain particular metrics. There's a few that I really dislike.
I want to hear about the ones you really dislike, Valence.
Net Promoter Score is one of my bugaboos. I will say it. I don't think it tells the story people think it does. And because of that, people make decisions based on, oh, it's gone up this percentage. That's great. But what it really aggregates is the top and the bottom,
right,
in terms of the score you get. So, and if you don't have enough volume, that number jumps dramatically with each person who jumps into each domain. So I can jump 10 points with one person if I don't have enough on the top and bottom end. So it's a fake metric. Most of your data is in the mid-range. So even if I can track it, I need more information on why they're trending a certain way. And is that a continuous trend? So they're trending from 7 to 8. Are they going to move into 9, or is this just a trend in the mid-range? I don't know. NPS doesn't tell me. But because it does the extremes, like I said, the percentages are way too flexible in terms of the variance and the range of error on it. And it doesn't tell a good continuous story. So I think it gets overused. The scope of how it's used is wrong because of the variability. If I can add a plus minus 20% on either end of the scale, how useful is it?
But isn't end count important with all survey data? Like if you have a low end count, then you're always going to have skewed data one way or another. When you look at the NPS, the thing that you want to look at isn't the exact number, it's the trends, right? What is this indicating to me over time? How are people's experiences changing over time? Can we correlate that with, time of the year? Can we correlate that with other things happening, news releases, changes or challenges that have happened within those product releases?
But are we capturing all those different dynamics in an NPS score? Not really.
No, but what you're doing in a true NPS score when you're tracking it over time, which is the goal, is to track how experience changes over time. Now I use that as an indicator of that experience. Now it tells me, oh, there may have been something I missed. I go back to that point. I investigate that. And it's the same with any metric. No metric can just be the number.
I'm not saying it is, but I'm saying it. NPS is the most easily gamified metric I've ever seen.
Service desk tickets are.
Well, service desk tickets is the easiest. but I mean, in terms of its impact on the end score, which is, if I like the individual, it doesn't mean that the experience was good, but I'm going to score you high because I like you.
But that may mean I didn't have that bad of an experience because I liked you.
Oh, it doesn't mean that. It means I might have scaled it higher because I don't want to impact you because I think it will.
Wow.
So because of those potential dynamics, like I said, you have to understand the dynamics that play in the responses people have. And the other end, when it's a qualitative measure like NPS, is one person's 8 is another person's 10 is another person's 6. So I don't even know if we're giving good service. I don't know, because I don't know what it's relative to for the person answering the question. So the same experience can get entirely different answers. So how do I use that as a basis of we're doing well or not? We could give the exact same thing, move up, move down. It doesn't mean our service has gotten any better. I can't quantify that in any meaningful way.
One thing I'd add to this is, people tend to measure a transaction, right? Not the overall experience. So you take your car to the dealership, you get an oil change. They ask you, how was the oil change? They ask you for an NPS score, right? You give them a score, 9 out of 10, did what I wanted, everything else. Then you go and buy an electric car. You never need to get an oil change again. Are you more satisfied or are you less satisfied, right? The data is showing the transaction, not showing that I actually didn't want to come in for an oil change at all. Right? I didn't even want to come in and get my car repaired. I would rather my car didn't get repaired. But I'm going to give you a 9 out of 10 because you gave me good service when I came in, right? So we need to look at a number of metrics to tell a story.
Yeah, so you need to look at a number of metrics, treat it as an indicator as you would. But in that case, that technician has no influence over whether you switch to an electric car. So what they can control within their organization, they're controlling that piece and
so
measuring
it's a transaction.
I have to tell a story. I'm sure we'll never use this, but So it's about NPS. A couple of years ago, I was going to a podiatrist. I had it's super exciting. I had a wart on my foot I couldn't get rid of. And what's that? I have a series of photos. But
Each phase of it.
But at the podiatrist, what I would do is I would go in and they would burn it with a laser. And that was the experience. You'd go into the office and they would laser your foot and they'd say tell me when you can't stand the pain anymore and we'll stop. And the more pain you can withstand, the quicker this will be. And then at the end of this, the powers that be decided to do a net promoter score and be like, how good was that experience? And the people working there hated it because they're like, what are they supposed to say? How good was the experience of me inflicting harm on you?
Best burning I've ever had.
So to me, there was
I lasted 15 more seconds this time.
well, that's it, right? There's this disconnect between what the corporation thinks is oh, we want to measure satisfaction versus the actual experience and how disconnected that can be. So
because the question is, if I'm using NPS, how would you recommend our organization? Which is very different than what I recommend that person.
Right.
And the experience they're measuring is that person, not the ultimate experience. It's like, great repairman, hate my car.
Yeah.
I can absolutely get
It's your
that with
car,
NPS.
man.
Oh, I know, but it might lead to that whole aspect of I no longer deal with that company because I no longer trust the cars they build.
The company information.
Yeah, my repairman is great.
Yeah.
May not be affiliated with the company. Or that might be a really good repairman that they have.
Right.
But just because that repairman's good doesn't mean I like your company. It doesn't mean I like your cars. And it might mean I'm going to switch away because as much as he's doing a good job, I don't want to have to keep repairing my car.
I wanted to pause and say a big thank you to each of you. This has been really insightful.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks. It's always fun.
So let's talk about how we actually implement, high quality performance dashboards and metrics. What does that look like? Can you maybe walk me through your methodology?
So in this research, we've actually flipped our methodology a bit on its head from what we've traditionally done when it comes to metrics. The first thing that we've done is we don't want you to start with a blank piece of paper, right? What we started to curate is a set of standardized dashboards for different audiences to give you some ideas around what you could be tracking, the most common metrics that are important to CEOs, to CFOs, to CXOs, right, within your organization. And so what we want you to start with is explore these pre-created and pre-designed dashboards to see what of this resonates with you, what do you think would resonate with your key stakeholders within your organization. So step one is explore almost that art of the possible with our pre-designed dashboards. Right? The second thing we want you to do is not just take that at carte blanche and just use it directly. The second thing we want you to do is test it. So speak with your core stakeholders, set up standardized meetings to understand what they're looking for, test some of the things that you think are important, and really start to build out a customized dashboard and metrics that are really important to each of those key audiences. Right? So now we have a sense of what we should be tracking, why they care about, and now finally in step 3, we're going to get to the data. Right? Now we want to start to ready our data to make sure we have the information and data that's needed in order to represent that information. Okay? From there, we want to make sure we test that with those stakeholders. So step 4 is we have the data, we have the metrics. Now let's see if you believe it. Right? Let's see what happens when I present that information and I communicate that to you. And so we'll actually go through an activity too with our members where we'll have them prepare the data and we'll have them say, okay, pretend you're presenting it to me. What would you say now as a result of that information? What are the great insights that you're really going to have a conversation with your CEO about? Right? How are you going to indicate what changes you need to have happen in the organization? How it's driving your decisions? Right? And so we do almost a mock presentation of what that could look like and preparing yourself for possible questions or objections that may come forward.
So almost a coaching session there too, to figure out how do you move past the numbers to the actual story?
Exactly. And so getting that part ready, thinking through what could be the potential issues and how am I going to communicate how this is changing and what we're going to do about the information and data. Not just the fact that here is the data, but this is what we're going to do about it.
Right. I love that. So, walking through that exercise, what do you walk away with? Is there, a presentation that you get at the end? Is there, a template or a model? What do you walk away with?
Yeah. So we take those pre-designed custom dashboards that you're starting with, and we actually help you to customize that throughout this whole journey, right? So you walk away with your own designed templates that you can use to actually communicate and use them almost ready baked from that position. Right? So what people walk away from is their own suite of dashboards that are fully customized, as well as, possibly most importantly, the action plan for how you're going to change as a result of that. So what is your review cycle? What does continuous improvement look like? And all of those great factors that go into actually taking the metrics off the paper and into real life.
Right. Now, as we think about putting that into practice, one of the things you mentioned earlier, Carlene, is that almost nobody is starting with an organization where nothing is measured, right? You've got metrics, they're working to some degree or not working to some degree. To get from there to a world where, your leaders feel good about the metrics, how long does that typically take? And how much can be done in one concentrated week of effort?
Yeah. So that question actually has multiple levels to it, right? So I'd love to be like, we could do it all in 1 hour or 1 day. But the truth is that getting people to buy into what you're promoting and selling could take a while, particularly based on the existing relationship that you have, the quality of your data, right? So depending on that, when we start off by doing an assessment, it could take multiple weeks, if not a little bit months even.
It's trust building.
Exactly, over time, and then readying the data, right? But we don't want you to start with it being like this huge marathon of an effort, right? So what we really try to do is start you off with a quick start guide, right? So how can we really rapidly understand what is it that your members, your stakeholders care about? And then really starting to customize those pieces out. So what we do almost in our 4-day workshop, for example, Jeff, is that we'll start by building out and customizing that dashboard. Then we'll help you to figure out how do you build more quality into that data and to the trust, practice doing some mock presentations, and then we'll build out that action plan. And so it's almost like this Kickstarter or accelerator that we'll do at the beginning. And then from there, provide ongoing coaching to, okay, how do we really bring this to life within your organization?
I love that. So it sounds like you can make, a really impressive amount of progress in a really quick period of time. But once you've figured out kind of where you're going, there's the getting the data, there's the beating it up. And that is, your mileage may vary based on your current state.
Exactly.
Yeah. I love that. That's so exciting. And as we've discussed, it seems like there's so much opportunity to not only reap the benefits of that, but truly rebuild some of these relationships and really, transform the way IT is serving the organization.
That's our hope, right? And hopefully your data is in pretty good shape, right? Like not everyone has to start from scratch on this. It may just be an evolution to where you're going and where you want to go as an organization. And we can help you with that too.
So amazing. I really appreciate you being here today and all your insights.
Thanks, Jess.
And if you're interested in learning more about establishing high-value IT performance dashboards and metrics, check out the full blueprint at infotech.com.